lo and behold, and of course the government there was huge campaigns for 7% for the government. Experiment on like exposing people.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the first event of the CEU Democracy Institute's event series titled Confronting Goliath, Hungarian Authoritarian Elections in a Comparative Perspective, which aims to provide theoretical and comparative reflections on the prospects of democratic restoration in Hungary. My name is Bálint Mikola. I'm a researcher at the CEU Democracy Institute and the coordinator of this series, with which we aim to engage in productive discussions with civil society, journalists, the academic community, and we also aim to reach out to a general audience, to whoever is interested in politics and the prospects of Hungarian democracy. So the first event in this series is titled Economic Prospects, How to Dismantle an Oligarchic System, and it has various ambitions. First, we hope to have an engaging discussion about the most appropriate labels that can be used to describe the Hungarian political economic system and the implications thereof. Second, we will seek to evaluate what the choice of this economic model implies in terms of outcomes measured by different performance indicators and where this positions Hungary compared to its regional competitors. Third, we will delve into how the European Union has tried to intervene and facilitate the country's return to capitalist market economy and whether and through which instruments it succeeded. And lastly, we will assess the prospects of restoration through domestic changes and particularly the room for maneuver available to a potential new government. So to discuss these pressing and relevant subjects, our expert guests on this panel today will be László Bruszt, Professor Emeritus at CEU and former Director of CEU Democracy Institute, Éva Palócz, the Chief Executive Officer of Kopint-Tárki, József Péter Martin, the Executive Director of Transparency International Hungary and a Senior Lecturer at the Corvinus University of Budapest, and Gergő Medve-Bálint, Associate Professor at the Corvinus University of Budapest and Director of Institute at the ELTE Center for Social Sciences. So thank you to all for being here. And I would like to start with a definitional question. So the Hungarian political economic system established under the current regime has been referred to as an oligarchic system, as a post-communist mafia state, as a crony capitalist system, or as an emblematic case of reverse state capture. Which of these labels do you think best describes the Hungarian model, and what are the political and practical implications of the label that we choose? Whoever wants to go first. Maybe László?
Thanks. I have frustrating news because I don't think that it's possible to have in 2 words the essence of systems. It's different from the perspective of comparative politics, from the perspective of political scientists, political economists, sociologists. It has different perspective. It's important to look at the composition of that. This is very coherent. It's not conflicting at all. But since your question is how to dismantle an oligarchic system, it's important to see these different aspects of the system. So from a political perspective, this is a simple electoral autocracy. It's not, doesn't have too many interesting perspectives. From a perspective of as a system of governing society, this is a neo-patrimonial regime that basically creates dependency relationships between different categories of social actors. It rewards loyalty and it punishes disloyalty. It has a system of doing that as an economic system. I have no, that's more Éva's but it's as a developmental model. Perhaps one word would be disgusting word, stagnocracy, something that stagnates, doesn't really change the position of the country because, and that is related to the next, as a geopolitical actor, this is a country, this is a regime that created a Guinness record in geopolitical rent seeking. So it can seek, it basically survives and maintains a regime that can get at the same time rents from Russia and Washington, from Brussels to several India. It's a very interesting system that actually follows in that the Belarusian system. And then finally, as an economic system, we will talk about that. I think one of the next questions might be this is not the typical market economy, in the sense that the capacity of economic actors to profit from rational calculative enterprise is limited because access to resources is shaped by political considerations, and then the capacity of actors to profit only from rational calculative enterprise, which is another criteria. They cannot get rents, and that's also harmed. So this is a system in which key criteria of normally functioning market economy are missing.
Thank you very much. So we already have a very multifaceted and discipline-related definition, but I'm wondering whether the others could weigh in, and whether you have a preferred concept to describe the Hungarian political economic system.
Very shortly, from economic point of view, I think that oligarchic system and crony capitalism are relevant concept or relevant terminology. I'd like to refer this famous sentence of András Lánci, president of the near-to government think tank Százalék, when he said, "What you call corruption is actually the main policy of Fidesz, actually creating a national bourgeoisie." And I think that this sentence clearly shows what is the essence of this policy, and it is clearly linked the corruption and the national bourgeoisie. Sometimes it is called middle class, but it is not the same but similar. So that shows that it was a policy since the beginning of these 15 years that the Hungarian government wanted to create a national is very important, national bourgeoisie, which we can call oligarchy, by the means of corruption. And concerning the crony capitalism, it is a broader sense. It symbolizes the entire system. Not only the oligarchs are at the top of a certain hierarchy, or at the top of a certain pyramid. They do not do actually not too much or hardly anything, only skimming 20-30%, usually knows us better, of the overpriced share of the price, then pass over the work to the subcontractors, and to the subcontractors of the subcontractors and so on. Then there is a pyramid, and the position of an entrepreneur in this pyramid, how high you are in this position, and of course your rent is depending on your position in this hierarchy, strongly depends on the loyalty, and so the whole enterprise sector is actually captured by this situation.
Yes, I would like to fine-tune the concept of state capture, because it was mentioned also in your question. So you said, Bálint, that it's a kind of reverse state capture. I don't like this term, reverse state capture. It is a state capture, and I will explain why. So according to the recent literature, we distinguish between political state capture and oligarchical state capture, as well as between partial state capture systems and systemic state capture systems. So in this topology, we find that Hungary is a state capture, which is a political one, and as well as a systemic one. So it was long time ago when state capture the term was referring only to the oligarchical state capture, when the oligarchs or businesses captured the state. It's not anymore like that in Hungary and in some other countries, although Hungary is clearly a unique case in the European Union. We see a political state capture. However, I completely agree with what László and Éva have already said, that as far as the political regime is concerned, I think this is a hybrid regime, a hybrid autocracy, or a hybrid electoral autocracy, as the European Parliament even put it in a declaration back in 2022. And in terms of economy, the closest term to me is crony state capitalism. So I usually put the word state to it as well, to the definition. So I would say that this is a hybrid electoral autocracy with crony state capitalism, and the term state capture refers more to the scheme of corruption rather than the description of the whole political and economic system. But having said that, I also would like to stress that I don't think, but there are lots of competing definitions, and I don't think that this is the most important how we define. What is most important is to find the common denominator among these definitions, and the common denominator is that they combine democratic features with authoritarian practices. So it's a kind of in-between regime between when it comes to politics, between democracy and full-fledged dictatorships.
Thank you. Gergő?
Yes, so a few minutes ago you said you completely agree with what has been said before. And in this panel, probably tonight you will hear this from us several times, that we completely agree with each other, or to a great extent. As for the definitions, as for the labels that you mentioned, in addition to what has been said, I would use a term sovereign dependence, which I try to introduce in the literature just to have a conceptual innovation, which is good in academia, but also try to explain what the inherent tensions in this really particular economy are. So sovereign dependence, this is something which is impossible. So you are either sovereign or you are dependent. So how can the Hungarian political economy combine this? So actually, Hungary is a dependent market economy, just to throw in another label, which is quite common for the region, for the Central and Eastern European region, which means that it has a high exposure to foreign capital, foreign investors, and not only exposure, but they are really dominant actors in the economy, especially in complex manufacturing. And the Hungarian government, the Hungarian economy as such, is highly dependent on the export performance of these complex manufacturing investors. So this is the first part of the dependence story. The second part is how come sovereign or sovereignism comes into this picture. So the current Hungarian government's major objective has been since 2010 to expand the policy space, especially the domestic policy space, which is available for it. And in this effort, it indeed tried to create from the top kind of a state-created national bourgeoisie, which is actually dependent on the state, dependent on public procurements, dependent on rents which they get from the state. So there is a kind of dual dependence in this system, which bears a lot of tensions. So this is not really sustainable in this form. Sustainability is only possible with increasing repression, and as we see, increasing the authoritarian tendencies in the democratic institutions, but also in the economy. We'll stop here and then we can return to this idea.
Okay, we have an immediate response from László.
I like the idea, not the label, the sovereignty. The idea is I think it's good that and Hungary is not alone on trying to reduce dependence. If you would call sovereignty dependency management or something like that, it might be closer to reality. That is, Poland's prime minister under a peace government is always talking about his desire to reduce being a dependent market economy. That he uses several times. And they invested a lot in doing exactly that. To strengthen the domestic industries, to strengthen the inclusion into the global value chains. Orbán does the opposite. He uses, for him, sovereignty is his government's sovereignty, not the economist's decreased dependency. And that's why, actually, I think we agree all that this is a system that got stuck in managing dependency. It's more dependent actually as a result of this batteries business than it was 4 years ago. Much more.
Okay, there's a pattern that was brought up by several of you, which relates to the dependency of the Hungarian economy on export-oriented markets and on foreign direct investment. And I would like to focus a bit on that in light of regional differences. So if this is a pattern that explains the backwardness of the Hungarian economy, then what is the explanation to the fact that our competitors and our regional peers in the Visegrad region did considerably better in the past 1.5 decades in terms of economic growth, in terms of household consumption rates, in terms of productivity? Because as I understand, several of these industries are also heavily exposed to export-oriented markets, and the automotive industry in particular is a regional strength. So how do our regional competitors diversify or alleviate these risks, if at all? And if this is not the reason, then what's the reason that they are doing better economically?
That's my turn. I brought a picture which summarizes the economic processes in the last 15 years. There are 3 graphs, base index, so-called base in this. 2010 is 100, and compared to this year, 2010, what is the position of different countries in the region, the Visegrad 4 countries and also Romania. We always include, since some years, we have been including Romania into this group because it belongs to that. Through its very quick catch up to the region, and one is the GDP compared to 2010. The other, the household consumption. It is Hungarian, but sorry, household consumption, and the third below that is the investment. And what we can see on this graph, I hope you can see it also from there, that the Hungarian economy developed and grew at a slower rate, even in the first 10 years, but we know well it has stagnated in the last 3 years. But if we take the components of this stagnating, of this frozen status, it will be clear that that argument that weak German economy, the weakness of the German economy, is the reason for the weak Hungarian performance. That is not right. Simple. We frequently hear that from the Prime Minister or from the Minister for Economy that if the German economy would have grown better, then also the Hungarian performance would be better. That is not right, because we can see that all other countries in the region had a higher growth rate, but it's 0 in Hungary, than Hungary. We had to admit that even in other countries, except for Poland, because the Polish miracle lasts still and will last in the coming years too. But also the other countries reached a moderate growth rate, but more than Hungary. So we have to search the reasons for this weak performance, not only in the international condition and the German economy, but also for internal sources, and that is not the household consumption. That we also frequently hear that if the household consumption would have been higher, then also the Hungarian economy could have performed better. That is also not right, because the Hungarian consumption, that is the upper right graph, exactly the same rate as the Polish. The 3% in the average of last 3-4 years, that is a very good rate. What is the problem? It is the investments, and investments are falling very, very severely, especially in the last 4-5 years, both private investments and public investments, and we can raise the question why the Hungarian entrepreneurs do not invest so few. Then we can mention the question of trust for economic policy.
So József wants to contribute.
Yes, I would like just to add to this that you can.
Yeah, okay.
Because it illustrates very well not only what you said, but what I will say as well. So it. I don't think it has anything to do with the backwardness of the Hungarian economy compared to the regional peers. I don't think it has it has very little to do, let's put it in a milder way, with this kind of dependency or FDI dependency or export dependency what was in the question. It has to do mainly, first and foremost, of the nature of not only of the economic policy, but of the political regime. So this is a kind of political economic explanation, but I think by now it has become quite clear that the autocratic state is the sinner behind the shallow economic performance of the Hungarian economy. And it has become clear, I would say, after the COVID period. So since 2022, when the economic indicators have deteriorated enormously, not only GDP and actual individual consumption and also the investment rate, but also almost all others. We know that inflation was the highest in Europe back in 2023, but even last year was third biggest in Europe. The productivity rate it has been also very, very shallow compared to the regional peers. And behind that, I think it is if we want to find only the economic explanation, we might fail. I think there is a political explanation behind it, and this political explanation is that this autocratic state, with some time delay, but deteriorated enormously the business environment in Hungary. Why am I saying that with a slight delay? Because in the previous decade, it was not. The economic indicators were relatively favorable, at least some of them, not the structural ones. The structural ones were very bad even at that time, but the headline indicator, the so-called headline indicators, so the GDP, inflation, industrial production, investments as well. So we had a very high investment rates between 2017 and 2022. So they were relatively favorable. Despite the systemic breach of rule of law and despite the systemic corruption which occurred in this country, or political state capture. So, but this is already the past, and by now it has become clear that the whole economy is optimized for this loyalty-based connections, and not for market performance. And I think the main reason behind this backwardness and behind this shallow economic performance is this autocratic state and the systemic corruption and the systemic breach of rule of law which has been developed.
Thank you, Gergő, and then next.
Yeah, let me stress that the Hungarian economy is not backward as such. So we need to have a good benchmark. It might be backward compared to Switzerland, let's say, or even Germany. But in a global context, the Hungarian economy is, well, an advanced semi-peripheral country.
But in regional, no?
But even in regional context, Hungarian economy is not backward as such. But the problem is that its performance is lagging behind the regional peers. This is what we can, I think, all agree. And there were a lot of unused opportunities in the last decade and a half, or even 20 years, which explain why this relative backwardness we can talk about. And I want to emphasize the difference between the Polish story and the Hungarian. I think László can add quite a lot to this, because for a considerable time, Poland had a government which had a very similar ideological background to the current Hungarian government. But the Polish story is actually a success story in the Central and Eastern European region, despite having populist right government in between 2015 and 2023. And why could Poland succeed? I mean, this is the only country which recorded economic growth during the global financial crisis. It has survived COVID quite quickly and without much damage. So there is a remarkable policy continuity in terms of economic policy in Poland. It's a kind of active developmentalist state which really tries to invest in the Polish domestic businesses, small and medium-sized enterprises, tries to build national champions. But the big and really important distinction between the Polish and the Hungarian story is that in Poland they aim for competitiveness. They try to create competitive companies which are competitive in the export markets, unlike in the Hungarian case, which is mostly characterized by providing rents to those businesses which are loyal to the Hungarian government. And the remarkable continuity in Poland means that this kind of active developmentalist economic policy characterized Polish governments in the 2000s, 2010s, and this really matters as a long-term investment, which is actually lacking in Hungary. There is not much of a vision of an economy which should be placed on the high road of growth. This is missing in Hungary. I could go on, but time is limited.
Just briefly, because several of you said already that you mentioned trust or the question of the political environment. That's, I think, the most important. I agree that basically the last Nobel Prize was given to Alessina and others who said that to get out of the middle income trap, to develop, after a while you have to invest in human capital. That's not happening. And the other is to have an environment, business environment, in which those who innovate can safely expect extra rents, and if you don't innovate, you cannot expect rents. The exactly opposite is the case in Hungary. It doesn't really help development or innovation or getting out of this situation.
Sorry, if I may add just one thing, I forgot that not all the regional peers are very successful, so Slovakia cannot really be considered as a big success case. They seem to face very similar problems like Hungary. Very high exposure and even higher exposure to the complex manufacturing industries exports, brain drain in terms of young talents migrating from the country, quite sluggish economy, low innovation potential, relatively low productivity, which all characterize the Hungarian economy as well, and also quite limited investment in human capital. So the Czech and the Polish cases are somewhat better, actually much better. The Slovak and the Hungarian are more or less on the same level.
Let me ask Gergő a follow-up question, because you are the co-author of a book that assessed the performance of the Hungarian economy during the past 2 decades of EU membership, and one of the recurring arguments on why the Hungarian economy has underperformed its regional peers is that the EU funds flowing into the country have not been used efficiently, and I'm wondering whether this claim can be substantiated. Of course, we all know many examples of heavily overpriced, pointless EU-funded projects that did not contribute to the national economy or any particular sector. However, what explains the overall pattern of why did our regional peers manage to use these funds more sustainably? Was it due to the regulatory environment, the compliance mechanisms, or better planning of the projects, or how could we have used EU funds more efficiently?
Well, I think this is a systemic issue, and probably one of the most important. I mean, I wouldn't say that the very efficient use of EU funds would have made a huge difference. Probably they would have contributed to greater economic growth, like in Poland. But the systemic issue is that the Hungarian approach to use EU funds is to spend everything as quickly as possible. So we are quite, I mean, the Hungarian government and the whole institutional system, which is designed to absorb EU funds, is a world champion in absorbing them, in contracting them out, spending them quickly. The problem with this is that the quality of those projects is not that much emphasized. So you mentioned overpricing. There are a lot of stories of inefficient, useless spending of EU money, public procurement issues, which more or less have been resolved because of the EU pressure. But still, lack of real competition, meaningful competition, overpriced investments mean that in the long run, in these 15, 20 years, EU funds haven't delivered as much as they could have. Yeah, that's the answer to this.
I agree with Gergő that this is a systemic problem. I would go even one level further to the EU level because the EU originally, when they introduced the structural funds under the Delors Commission, basically the idea was that information about developmental opportunities is dispersed. It is at the level of municipalities, at the level of sub-regional units, firms, associations of firms, NGOs, civil society, and then what should be the way to spend these monies is to allow them to get access to this type of monies, form developmental alliances, and then develop sectors, regions, whatever. So that was the idea. So this is a very decentered system. In 2002, the EU introduced the absorption capacities idea. That was what Gergő mentioned, that the most important thing is to burn the money as fast as possible. Those who will get more money, who can burn faster. But that's not just, it's not about just waste of money, but it basically giving money to central governments to eliminate those autonomies that would have allowed for developmental alliances to be formed in the first place. So that's the most perverse system in the sense that it helps to undermine developmental agency in countries that don't have strong self-governments and don't have strong civil society. So one of the reasons why Poland is better is that they have elected regional councils, so they can participate at least in a part of spending of these monies.
Poland is the only Central European country which actually has meaningful regional operational programs. That sizable amount of EU funds are allocated to the voivodeships, to the regions, where actually they can implement them, and no other country followed this footstep. So centralization of the entire system is one of the pitfalls here.
You mentioned civil society. We can raise the question, and I think that is important. We can raise the question why the society tolerated 15 years this corrupt system, so to maintain this corrupt system. Since 10 years at least, or 8 years, I don't know how much, this is widely known that through corruption, 20-30% of the EU money disappear at the oligarchs. And behind that, there was an ideology of the government, an argument of the government that you shouldn't care of this money, that is not your money, that is not a Hungarian taxpayers' money, that is the European taxpayers' money, it is cheap, that is not your business, that's none of your business. Or even more, we will steal from the European taxpayers, not from like a Robin Hood, this is a patriotic action. And many years the population believed that, even though some parts of the population believes it, although the fact is that the European money is fixed in a certain amount in euros for 7 years. And those parts which is stolen, that couldn't be used for good purposes, for industrial development and so on. So I think that the new politics has to communicate that and has to loudly say that was not a normal process.
I completely agree that the problem is far beyond the Hungarian case only. So I agree that all the other countries face lots of similar challenges, as well as even on the EU level when it comes to the whole functioning of the system, it is also fashionable whether it leads to the most efficient way. We wrote with Gergő a study some years ago in which we tried to show, and I think we managed to do it, that this distribution of the EU fund has got unintended consequences, and not only in Hungary but also in across the Central and Eastern European countries. Having said that, I would like to underline some peculiarity of the Hungarian system as such, and we shouldn't forget that currently there is no money inflow from the EU, or there is some, but very few. But 20 billion, as much as 20 billion euros are blocked currently in the framework of cohesion funds and the RRF funds. Because of the conditionality mechanism was triggered against the Hungarian government back in 2022 because of the breach of rule of law and corruption. We shouldn't forget either that Hungary, when got this enormous amount of money from the EU, was per capita one of the biggest beneficiaries of the EU funds. And the whole amount of this money was much bigger than the Marshall Aid after the Second World War. So from this money, the government or the state could create a real wealth for the society. But it didn't happen, as we all know. But what we could unfortunately observe is a systemic theft of the EU funds. And although I'm not familiar in depth with the money distribution mechanism in the peer countries, but I think the level of this systemic theft of EU funds is much higher than, or much deeper, if you want, than in the other countries of the region. Why do I think so? Simply because the nature of corruption in this country is much more centralized than anywhere else in the European Union, including well, I wouldn't say that peripheral countries, because Hungary has become, as we can see in the chart as well, Hungary has become one of the poorest countries in the European Union. So I think this kind of organized theft is quite unique, as well as the many methods how the EU fund fraud was made, how they stole the EU funds. Not only overpricing, there were some simple theft, or there were some investments which are simply useless for the public. So I think that there might be some Hungarian peculiarities in it.
So the dynamic of our discussion has already started to shift towards the EU and its potential reactions to how EU funds are used in member states, and here I would like to reflect on the instruments that were introduced to deter the Hungarian economy from its oligarchic path, including the infringement procedures, the Article 7 procedure, as well as the introduction and implementation of the rule of law conditionality mechanism. So I'm wondering which of these instruments had a tangible impact on somehow restoring fair market competition in Hungary. And can any of these instruments serve as yardsticks on the long run, or are these one-time interventions that have a reparatory function but do not steer the Hungarian economy in a certain direction?
So I think there are in this the EU by now has a rule of law toolbox, and in this toolbox there are at least 4 elements: the so-called rule of law reports. These are the softest tool. Then the infringement procedures, which has been used for many years. Then the conditionality mechanism, and then the 7th articles procedure. I think by far the most efficient tool is the conditionality mechanism, at least when it comes to systemic problems. Infringement procedures are very good when it is to address some particularistic problems. When it comes to systemic issues, then infringement procedures, as we could observe previously before the conditionality mechanism was accepted and then triggered against Hungary. So the infringement procedure are not capable to tackle the systemic issues. On behalf of Transparency International Hungary and also myself as well, we did some studies on the impact of the conditionality mechanism, how these 27 milestones, super milestones, and so-called targets have been complied by the Hungarian government. And we came to the conclusion that first, lots of these milestones are simply obstructed by the Hungarian government, so simply not implemented. I think it's not a big surprise for those who are sitting here. But there are some, and about that we do not speak too much. There are some which we found not very efficient or not very capable to tackle the problem of systemic corruption. So for the first group, I would mention, for example, for those group which the Hungarian government obstructs, I would mention the Integrity Authority and the Anti-Corruption Working Force. So the Hungarian government or the parliament doesn't have enough empowerment to these organs. I would also mention the asset declaration system. I don't want to go into details because it would be far too technical. And in the second group, I would mention first of all the judiciary. As you might remember, the European Commission accepted the judiciary reform back in 2023 and released as much as 10 billion euros for the Hungarian government, which is now challenged, seemingly challenged very recently, some days ago. It was challenged by the European Court of Justice, although we don't know the final decision yet. But okay, if we take the initial decision of the European Commission, then the European Commission accepted this judicial reform. And I think there are some important steps forward in this reform. However, I think it's quite evident for those who observe the Hungarian situation and live in this country that the pressure on the judiciary hasn't ceased to exist, and also that we cannot say that the judiciary as such is fully independent in Hungary. So it is a clear proof that this milestone could not restore could not restore the independence of the judiciary, because for that the whole system should be changed most probably, and the rule of law should be restored. But not only this, also in terms of the freedom of information, in terms of the reforms in the criminal procedure, we find those milestones which, even if they were fully implemented, we might doubt that it can reach the the desired end, and it can break the systemic corruption. But of course, the major problem with this milestone is that the Hungarian government doesn't want to comply with all of them, because if they think that if they complied with all of them, then the regime might fail. So in other words, the current regime and the rule of law is incompatible with each other. Okay, I stop here.
Thank you, László.
I'm very skeptical about anything that the EU does in that field, partly because the EU itself contributes to the worsening of situation in rule of law. We were discussing that, for example, through the structural funds. But more importantly, it doesn't address the problem of the domestic demand side for rule of law. That is to create a constituency and empower those who might benefit in Hungary from rule of law. Give you examples. Business. The loyalty system that we described as neo-patrimonial regime basically can reward the loyal and punish the illoyal or those who would come to this idea to finance the opposition or support independent organizations, and this is done with or has been done with EU monies. The other thing is that several times in the European Parliament, Hungarian and non-Hungarian members of European Parliament suggested already to strengthen the lateral distribution of EU monies, that is via investment banks, for example, that would give directly monies on market basis. Yes, not on loyalty, political basis. Doesn't work. The other was the idea of directly financing civil society organizations, not through the government. Now all the monies go through that, and that is for maintaining the system. The rules of distributing these monies didn't change. So, and I can go on the same for self-governments. That is, Gergő mentioned already that the only country in which there are regional development programs, in which meaning that the local self-governments and regional self-governments have a say, that's Poland, not Hungary. That means that if you would like to get as a mayor of a local or a regional entity get funding, then you have to be loyal. So otherwise you will be punished. So these are these actors' autonomy might be the guarantee that there will be an effective demand side for rule of law, and this is not supported. So that's the problem with the EU, I think.
But before being too skeptical,
skeptical.
But I agree. Of course, I was also critical about the what the EU can do. We have to stress, I think, that this is the first and only tool so far which sanctions corruption and which sanctions breach of rule of law, because until triggering this conditionality mechanism, it simply was not sanctioned. By now it is sanctioned, and the 20 billion euros are blocked, as well as it has become the part of the public discourse as well. So I think it has an important role. I think the most important role in the conditionality mechanism inside this toolbox, because I think that the 7th article procedure is for political reasons it might be a dead end simply. Or although it has been going on for a long time, so it is still the most important one, but it has some very strong limitations.
The only disagreement between us, not disagreement, but just that all these things, even that on the margins works, they are built on the idea of external sanctioning instead of creating a domestic constituency that can sanction by not voting, by resources devoting from the government to opposition and things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, these are two different approaches, different philosophies, and
That can complement each other.
yeah, sure, they can work together simultaneously, but I'm also very skeptical about anchoring democracy from externally, from some transnational level. Without the domestic constituency, without the domestic ownership, without domestic contestation, it doesn't really work. And the irony of the situation is that the EU hasn't really been designed to sanction its own members. I mean, this was unthinkable that any member state would undermine core EU norms and principles of liberal democracy. So Hungary's and also partially Poland's pathway triggered these mechanisms in the EU. So the EU is also in this learning stage and learning process. It tries to grow teeth that can bite, because previously it didn't have. So that's the irony of this whole situation. And as for the distribution of EU funds and giving greater ownership to the local level, to the regional level, this is very important. It seems to work. So in those countries, actually in those projects where there is real ownership of the domestic level, I mean the subnational level, those projects are much better and much more efficient. Even though this opens up new distributional conflicts, of course, because there will always be redistributive policies, there will always be distributional conflicts of interest, and manipulation, but it's a more efficient system as far as we know based on empirical examples.
Just some sentences about the sanctions, what sanctions the European Union can use this, and what consequences it can have. You mentioned that 20 billion euros grants and credit. One part of this is very, very cheap credit is frozen, but there are these other 10 billion euros which was awarded, but you mentioned in 2023, and this is no disputed between the European Parliament and Commission. This is also very ironic situation because the Commission, what is always criticized by the Hungarian government, like Brussels. The Commission is Brussels, not the Parliament in the vocabulary of the Hungarian government. So it seems to be as we were standing on the same side against the member of the Parliament. The member of the Parliament represents the other 26 countries. So Hungary is against the other 26 countries, actually. But I would like to say that if this case at the court will be judged in favor of the European Parliament, and money, these 10 billion euros will be withdrawn, that would be catastrophic consequences on the economy, on the Hungarian economy and on the Hungarian fiscal policy, fiscal stance. Some money are already coming pre-financing, but the Hungarian government has already spent less than planned, but even since the opening of this cycle in 21, 1.1 billion forints on an RRF program, Resilience and Reconstruction Program, and 3.4 billion forints for the multinational financial framework, that is cohesion funds. The Hungarian government, so if this money will not inflow, that is a catastrophic situation. And there is another, maybe that seems to be too statistical, but the situation is that when the Hungarian government pre-financing EU-funded, hopefully EU-funded projects, then it appears in the so-called cash flow balance of the fiscal balance. But in the ESA, the internationally used methodology, the so-called accrual-based balance, it doesn't contain. It will be taken away, even that this money will inflow in the future. If this money do not, and that has happened in previous years. So this money is not in the ESA balance. And if the final decision comes that no money at all, we have to repay on some parts of that money, it will be activated. And this huge amount will be accounted in the fiscal balance, in the ESA fiscal balance, what can deteriorate the Hungarian credit rating dramatically. So the money is missing, the credit rating is worsening, so that would be catastrophic.
Okay, so let me shift the focus a bit towards what domestic actors can do, because I perceived that there was a sort of consensus emerging that domestic actors should be given more agency in somehow restoring market economy and rule of law conditions. And here I'm specifically referring to the room of maneuver of a potential prospective government. So some of these economic benefits that are enjoyed by pro-government oligarchs under the current system have been institutionalized to an extent that they seem very difficult to dismantle. Some are completely irreversible. I'm referring to the 35-year concession deals, the outsourcing of property to public interest asset management foundations in the case of universities. So are these changes reversible? And is it possible to reverse or restore them, taking into account this often cited trilemma of rule of law restoration, which means that you can either take action in a fast, in a legal, or in an efficient manner, but you can only do two of these three things simultaneously. So is it possible to reverse these institutionalized changes under the context of the rule of law?
Well, definitely this is the billion-dollar question ahead of the national elections, and of course, lots of people are contemplating currently of these issues. My opinion is that at least it should be tried. So that's my very soft answer to that. The harder answer is that of course it will be very difficult, but I don't agree with those who would say that if we take into account the rule of law that nothing can be done. Sometimes I hear this opinion, that's why I am saying that nothing can be done because everything is legalized. Because this is a kind of legalized corruption, everything is legalized and nothing can be done. I completely disagree with this. This stands for different reasons. First, even if it legalized or there were attempts to legalize it, it does not mean it's legal. So I think in many cases, under the current Hungarian rules, the malpractices and the corrupt actions can be sanctioned. For example, if we take into account the systemic overpricing of the public procurement system, then I think if it can be proven in front of the law that in front of the court that it's deliberately the given procedure is deliberately given to some crony stakeholders, undermining free and fair competition, which should be according to the law. So even if there is a formal contract describing that procedure, it does not mean that it's legal in the substance. So in Hungarian we have this very good word of lepapírozva, sorry about those who do not understand that. So make the paperwork instead of the substance. So something like that. So when you make formally a deal, but that deal or that contract contradicts to the substance and the spirit of the law, I think it is unlawful. So that's why I think that lots of these systemic corruption issues, overpricing of the public procurement, hiding public money in the private equity funds, for example, these can be proved unlawful in front of a truly independent judiciary system, which we do not have currently. So that's why I think that the most important for the new government would be to restore the independence of the judiciary, to restore the rule of law, and if it is done, then I think lots of these malpractices can be sanctioned in front of the law. But even if we can prove or a new prosecution, for example, can prove that the money was unduly funneled to these government close players. Another thing is to what extent what the political sphere or the new government can do without the judiciary. I think it is also not zero what they can do. For example, you mentioned the 35-year concessions in motorway and garbage management. I think it can be annulled quite easily. I think it can be annulled as well the public interest foundation scheme, outsourcing enormous state assets into private foundations. It can be annulled as well. So there are two things. There is a political line, and there is a judicial and legal line. I think already politically lots of things could be done. But I believe that lots of these systemic corruption issues can or could be sanctioned in front of an independent judiciary.
I will go a little bit further. You mentioned some example, but there are several cases, clear-cut cases, what was even at that time not legal at all. Which were even at that time criminal cases. Yeah. For example, we can mention the Medve-Bálint power plant case, where the Hungarian government lost more than 20 billion forints, at least. Some estimations say much higher, with the need of investments after taking back the Matra plant, which was sold to Mészáros for 6 billion, and then bought back for 17. In the meantime, he withdrew I don't know how much, so more than 10 billion. So that is a clear. So that is no debate, I think. Then what are and the other such clear case is the MBH, the Hungarian bank holding, which was really a crime, is written in some books, and where it is described how these two banks were merged. One of them executed practically, the Hungarian Takarék Bank, and what crazy maneuvers the participants made until actually it went to the hand of Mészáros.
I think it's a little bit more complicated case, yeah. But
the banking expert says that it cannot be.
Yeah, but what is truly and clearly a very criminal case, and Matra, you are absolutely right. A more recent one, the central bank case, where 1.5 billion euros were simply stolen from or at least disappeared, and at least half was provenly stolen undoubtedly stolen, half of this 1.5 billion, the other just disappeared from the central bank. This is a clear criminal case. So that's why I am saying that the crucial thing here to reestablish the independence of the judiciary and the independence of the prosecution service, including the prosecution service. So not only the law courts, and not only because the first instance law courts are still more or less independent. We have problems with the higher instance court, the Supreme Court, which is called Curia, and then of course the Constitutional Court, which is entirely captured, and obviously the prosecution service, which is also captured. So to restore the independence of this whole system, that would be crucial. And if it somehow, and of course it depends to a large extent on the political empowerment and the margin how the new government wins. But if it can be done somehow, then I think I agree entirely with Éva. I think that there are lots of clear-cut cases, but even in not clear-cut cases, I think lots of investigations can be done and might be detected and put into the court.
László.
Good year ago, I think we had here in this room a Polish roundtable. The Minister of Justice was here, and several Polish scholars, journalists discussing, at first telling us and then discussing the issue of how they try to re-establish the rule of law in Poland. And they were very troubled. That was a very bad presentation what they gave. So the situation was very hard to do what your question is like. Get back to rule of law in an orderly way, not harming neither the spirit nor the word of existing legislation. I think that the situation in Hungary, at the time actually we felt that, they have this problem, but they don't have to change the constitution and don't have to change lots of institutions. They don't have these reserved domains that Orbán regime has. That is, even if when it is in opposition, it can control large parts of the state, or mechanism of horizontal accountability. And the good news is that you mentioned already the mass of the elections. So if the opposition wins with the qualitative majority, it can change everything. It can change the name of the capital. Change to Fahrenheit and re-establish the independence of the judiciary. That's it can be done, or if it doesn't win, I don't think that it's the situation is as desperate as in Poland, because it can use the opposition, meaning the Orbán regime, to say that they are blocking change. They prevent us to rule as the majority decided, and ask for a referendum. The good news is that the Hungarian electoral law that worked for Fidesz for 16 years can be used also to unmake the regime. So it's and actually makes it easier than in Poland. So that's one thing. So these are the legal, political issues. I think that if your question was also referring to the longer term, and longer term, again, I always come back to this issue that in a very hierarchical, dependent society, this patrimonial regime, that's the hotbed of oligarchy. So if in longer term, self-governments, strengthening, re-establishing self-governments, and not just the local, because this is very fragmented in Hungary, it's not, but the regional, that would be very important, and actually even strengthening. strengthening the autonomy of business, re-establishing basically the idea that is not so alien from Hungarians too, that you have business if people can freely profit from rational calculative enterprise. It's not, and then re-establish free press and other things. But this is the longer term. It's not just legal.
Yeah,
Yeah, just a short comment that it's important not to miss the target. So what needs to be restored? The rule of law, as we all agree. And I was looking at László because you did research on successful transitions and in terms of what sequence the reforms should follow each other to reach a relatively successful economic, also political transition related to the 1990s. And I think that János Kornai can guide us in some ways because, well, his work was, he did an autopsy of the state socialist system, which is, of course, now we have something different. But what his main argument was that we have to identify the systemic features of the system, which are the core features, and if we change them, then we can talk about a transformation, a real change in the system. And what are those systemic features? And one of them is the judiciary. So I completely agree. As I mentioned, we will hear this several times, the completely agree term. And the restoration of the independence of the judiciary is one of the key issues. Second is real competition authority, which takes care of the private sector in a sense that makes sure that there are no abuses of oligarchic power. It doesn't allow for mergers and acquisitions which go against the principles of the free market, and also in an ideal case a bureaucracy which is based on meritocracy and it's quite independent from private interests and, well, capture of some particular interest. So judiciary, competition authority, and the bureaucracy, these should be changed in a way which can restore rule of law, which can restore trust in the system, which can reduce systemic risk and risks to investments, and which can restore entrepreneurship and innovation.
Yeah, one last remark maybe, and then I'll open up the floor for discussion.
Yeah, sure. Just very shortly, that to extend a little bit what Gergő said, I would use the framing of Daron Acemoglu, the 2024 winner of the Economic Nobel Prize. And he said that so basically he distinguishes between extractive and inclusive institutions, and what Gergő said, it's to establish inclusive institutions. So judiciary, competition authority, and all the other state institutions should be inclusive, in other words, pursuing the public good, and it can create an inclusive environment not only in the society but also in business, which could create a sustainable economic growth. So that would be desirable and best case, very best case scenario.
And for that, civic participation is very important. The civic control is very important, and the media control as well.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it wouldn't really work out.
Exactly.
And reduce centralization, because this government or this regime, the last 1.5 decade, centralized everything, not only the institutions, the bureaucracy, but also intervened into the economy very deeply, but has to be reduced.
So let's collect a couple of questions from the audience. I suggest that we take 2 or 3 questions and then panelists respond to them. I see 1 here in the first row, 2, and I don't see more for the moment. So let's start with here.
I have a very short comment. So if I understand Laci correctly, if Fidesz wins with a 2/3 majority, the new name of Budapest will be Orbán-Grad. That's what you were talking about.
This is what
It's
I
just a
wanted to
sort
say.
of joke.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly.
You got it.
And I have a real question that is especially to Éva, because my question is if everything happens in a positive way after the elections, and this illiberal economic model, maybe we might call it like that, collapses, so how deep is the crisis? So how is the problem in reality? I mean that it's beyond Orbán and the regime maybe, if we talk about economic issues like the lack of labor, maybe cheap or not so cheap labor, the lack of investment as we discussed, the education system which doesn't support innovation, and a lot of other issues, the pension system and so on. So do we have a brighter future in case of a regime change?
Okay, let's take the other question from there, and then we can proceed.
Yes, my question goes in a similar direction. I would also be interested in some speculation, especially on the future of the EU funds after the election, because as it was mentioned, now we are waiting for this ECJ ruling about the annulment action and the 10 billions that will come, I guess, at some point after the election. On the other hand, in the case of Poland, there was over 130 billion euros disbursed and unfrozen right after the Polish elections. So yeah, I would be interested what would happen or what you expect to happen in case either side wins after the election, and what would be the consequences for the economy.
Thank you. And there was a third question there that I did not notice. Let's take that too.
My question would be, why couldn't Hungary imitate, or at least try to imitate, the example of some neighboring countries where these problems, economic and political problems, were more successively solved? Like, I would like to look at Austria, for instance.
Okay. So any reactions on any of these questions?
Second and third, rather. I think the first is for Éva.
What you mentioned, education, or we can healthcare and other systems can be reformed only in longer term. So that is a long-term issue. But what refers to economic performance, I think that the key is investments. Are investments behind me? Investments of the medium, small, medium, and even larger. So in terms of Hungarian, in Hungary, even the large firms are relatively small in international, in European comparison, and there are different scenarios. I was also thinking about this. There will be a certain strata of the entrepreneurs who will be liberated after this very, very strongly centralized system in the region where this negative selection operated in the country. So new energies can be liberated. On the other side, there will be conservative. So this system has the entrepreneurial spirit distorted in the last 16 years. So it will not come immediately, but I'm optimistic. So it will be better than this situation that we are living in now. But you can comment that. Concerning economic European grants, I have the impression that the negotiations with the bodies of the European Union are ongoing. So it will not be so that after April, 12th of April, we should start with the European Union. It is going now, and my impression is that Hungary can get money relatively quickly after the election. I mean, some months. And this is very urgent because what we haven't mentioned that the RRF, which is 10 billion altogether, will inspire at the end of this year. But maybe it will be prolonged because also other countries are in delay. So there is a movement to delay to prolong the deadline. But if it will be kept, then until the end of the year, the money has to be used. But cannot happen, of course. But as I told you, more than 1,000 billion forints were already spent by the present government, so we can get this money, and we can just hope that these case and in the court will be ended positively for the Hungarian government. I don't know what is the juridical formulation. That is my.
Thank you. Any other comments on the unfreezing of?
Just perhaps, yeah.
Onnan? Nem adok. Én másról, úgyhogy nyugodtan.
Just to add that so far 2 billion euros were lost for good for the Hungarian government, and as Éva said, if there is no agreement and there is no compliance with these 27 measures, then an additional at least 10 billion will be lost by the end of this year. So I think technically it is quite clear that if there is no change of government, then most of the funds will be lost. If there is a change of government, well, the rest of the cohesion funds, it can be lost technically only year by year. So it can last us until
10 billion is at stake.
Yeah, I mean that's what I said, 10 billion. But there is between the 10 billion, so there is another 10 billion from the cohesion funds. So but most of the funds will be lots of funds not immediately, but by the end of this year, but I don't expect to release the rest of the funds either, if there is no change of government. If there is a change of government, I think the intention of the opposition TISA party is quite clear by now. They would like to table all the draft bills which would target to comply with these 27 measures. And if it is complied, and then they expect to get basically the whole sum. Whether it will be technically feasible, especially in terms of the RRF, by the end of this year it should be spent entirely. So whether it will be technically feasible, it's an open question yet, but that's probably the expectation from the opposition party.
Just to your question on learning and learning from neighbors, I think that was your question. Yes. Austria is not a good example because it's having very different types of problems, economic from developmental problems. But Hungary can learn a lot from Romania, Poland, even Slovakia. Just to give you an example, we were talking the last 10 minutes about this EU level redistribution and how to milk the EU, get access to these monies. But there are now more and more lateral ways of getting resources from EU through the development banks and through EU level industrial policy. That's a very new development. There are these, I don't know whether you heard about these important projects of common European interest. That's a new thing. From Eastern Europe, Eastern Central Europe, 3 countries get just money, none the others, Poland, Slovakia, and Romania. Yeah. And the trick is not that they are more inventive or not, but they have functioning bureaucracy and judiciary. That's what Gergő said, that they can draft They have a very efficient bureaucrats who can draft programs, and they are trusted as partners. That no one is afraid, because these are projects in which you have to team up with German, French, and other companies, and they are trusted, and the Hungarians are not. There is lots to learn. Yeah, very good question.
So I'm sorry that we have to end on such a pessimistic note, but okay, probably not pessimistic. Okay, but unfortunately, our time is over. So I would like to thank our panelists for such an engaging discussion, as well as our audience here in the room and online. Probably, if we could give a round of applause to our panelists. Just a service announcement. So we will continue with this series titled Confronting Goliath, Hungarian Authoritarian Elections in a Comparative Perspective. Similar events will be held each Monday until around the middle of April. And the next session will be organized by Alexander Bohr on the 2nd of March, and it will address media and propaganda under autocratic regimes. So you are very welcome to attend that. We will keep sending invitations to those of you who are interested in these events. And a last service announcement is that you are all invited to a small reception outside the room after this session. So thank you very much, and have a nice evening.
Wrestling on opening it up or not, and might be Bruszt should have equipment automatic. Yeah, like 6. You're gonna get